All right, welcome to Gateway API meeting for July 11. We hope this is our last meeting before having released V050. So excited about all those things. It's a huge release for us. We're really excited. Thank you to everyone. I think everyone on this call has helped in some form or fashion to get us to this point. We're excited. But we have a few little odds and ends to get through. I think that's mostly what this meeting is about, but also want to welcome again Keith and everyone who's been working on Service Mesh and Gateway and how that works together. I think you'll have something to talk about closer to the end of this meeting. So yeah, and as always, I should add that kind of standard welcome that this is a standard Kubernetes community meeting. If you've been to any Kubernetes community meeting, this functions very similarly. Anyone is welcome to comment. Feel free to add things to the agenda that you want to talk about. And welcome everyone. With that, let's get started. I've added the first couple things to the agenda. The first one I wanted to discuss here is the named address type. I think we may have gone just a little step too far on this one, and so I'm proposing reverting part of a change we'd made earlier. So throughout this API, we have a number of enum values. In this case, we have an address type on Gateway. And one of the values we had there or allowed there was named address. It was removed earlier with the argument being that named address is not really portable in the sense that it will mean something different on every cloud. It will have a similar concept, but the same name is going to mean something different depending on whatever provider you're using. So the recommendation was instead to use a domain prefix value here. And I am completely supportive of that transition and that change. Where I think we made a mistake is removing the value altogether as a valid thing that could be set. My concern here is that so far we've said whatever was valid in V1 Alpha 2 is valid in V1 Beta 1. This release is, if you had a valid manifest in V0.4.0, it's going to be valid in V0.5.0. And I recognize not many people have used a named address type, but for anyone that has, this would break that for them. This would say, hey, when you upgrade, this is going to break on you. And that's just kind of a bad experience. And so my argument is still, hey, this should be deprecated. We should recommend using this newer pattern. But in the name of backwards compatibility, my argument is just to, let that value continue to be set. Any comments or hesitation about this change? I know we'd agreed to remove it initially, but I'm regretting that specific change.
I think regressing that change, reverting that change, is probably the right thing to do. Good observation.
Yeah, we did the same thing with reference policy already. Cool. I'm in favor.
Yeah, +1 for me too.
Okay. That's good. I think that's good to go then. I know I'm always want to be very careful when I revert a previous change that we'd agreed to, but I think there's enough consensus here that I'll remove the hold and let this one go in. All right, next up, just gonna run through the V050 milestone. And actually, before I do that, I've been talking with other maintainers. Our release process is slowly evolving. We're getting slightly better at this, but it still is at the place where we basically need 2 active maintainers online at the same time whenever we're hitting release. And life happens, and we don't have that many maintainers right now. So we needed to find a time where everyone was going to be, as many people as possible were going to be online. And I think just logistically, that's not going to be tomorrow. We had really hoped it was going to be tomorrow. I think instead what will likely happen is we'll cut RC2 either today or tomorrow, and we will aim for the final release on Wednesday. And I know everyone's in a different time zone, but what I mean is approximately 48 hours from now, we'll aim to have V0.5.0 released. So that's the goal. With that, let's run through this milestone and make sure we haven't missed anything too significant. The first one is this docs update. I really appreciate everyone who's helped here. I know Keith, you did some work here. Emily has done a lot of the work on this one, and there's one tiny bit left. And I think Emily has volunteered to take it, but if not, we can make sure that that someone can. It's just a tiny little bit left on this one to document how you install experimental CRDs instead of just standard. That's the last little bit on this one. I'm not too worried about this, and it's something like that can happen post-release if necessary. Next up, this is a bigger one, and Nick, maybe I'll hand it off to you because I know you've been doing a lot of work on this PR, and I've kind of lost track of the current state. But yeah, maybe you can give an update. I think this is the biggest one.
Yeah. So I think the reason this is the biggest one is that I've tried to be pretty picky about adding a bunch of conformance tests to test the stuff that I've changed here. I mean, because there's a few changes here. We've changed some of the reasons around for having an individual backend ref being invalid to the actual backend ref GoDoc, and then we've put the rules for handling invalid backend refs in the backend refs field of the HTTP route rules. So that means that because it means that in the sort of part where there's a list of backend refs, we can say, hey, if you've got 0 backend refs, here's how it works. If you've got, at least 1, here's how it works. And if you've got there is a case where you've got at least one valid backend ref and then at least 1 invalid, there's a specific behavior that we have to mandate there. So I've sort of moved things around a little bit to do that. I think that's okay. It's just in getting the conformance test right to test a bunch of this stuff as much as possible. And the other thing that we've changed here is that we've changed some of the error codes. It used to be 404s for everything. We moved to 500s for a lot of things. So everyone will need to update that. That's why I wanted to. That's why I wanted to make sure that there's, that the conformance tests reflect the new behavior. I think I've mostly got that. Steve called out. There's one thing that because I changed some stuff in the conformance tests, and that breaks a couple of other ones. So just fixing that up is, I think, the last outstanding thing.
Yeah, I'll say personally for me, I've taken some time to run through this, and thanks this is a massive PR heavy lift. I appreciate you taking this one on and actually taking the time to update and I think even add conformance tests, if I'm remembering correctly on this one.
Yeah, I added a few conformance tests as well. Yeah.
I know I feel very confident about the API changes you've made, and I need to spend just a little bit more time on conformance tests, but I think those looked good to me last I checked, and obviously Steve caught a couple issues, but this does feel close. Anyone have any concerns about this set of changes here, or any comments?
I think it definitely will need a call out in the change log that the behavior has changed a bit. I'll try and update the first comment of the PR with I think there's a bit of text in there, but I'll just review that and make sure it's as clear as I can make it.
Yeah, and I think our first release candidate included the change to 500. I think it was a change, but this really clarifies a lot that was kind of left murky in that initial one. So it's not, from the outside in, it's not a huge change. It just clarifies a lot and makes it part of conformance, which I think is awesome. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Hi. Sorry, Toby here. Sorry to jump in like this, but I think it's relevant. I had an audio glitch and I missed whether we were going to do an RC2 and then the 050.
Yeah, thanks for asking. I tried to write it out here just because it's easy to miss these things. But my goal here is to release RC2. There's a chance it could happen today, but likely tomorrow. and then a final release on Wednesday. And that's just, you know, that there's a limited set of maintainers. Do let us know if you are interested in becoming a maintainer and getting on that track. We are always up for more help. But because we have a limited set and we really need, you know, several around to get a release going, Wednesday's our best day for that.
Okay, no, that's great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Cool. Yeah. Cool. All right, I'll keep on moving through this list. Shane has done an awesome job with the blog post, and I think you added a comment on that PR, but I linked it in the agenda as well. A lot of that discussion and feedback has moved over to the Kubernetes website PR. We will mirror the blog post that we have on Gateway API over to Kubernetes.io blog. We've gotten a lot of great feedback on this one. Tim always has great docs feedback. I love getting reviews and his feedback. And I think I left some, but yeah, if you have thoughts, if you care about how we're presenting this release, would love to get your comments on this one. But Shane has done a great job getting this blog post ready to go. Next up on the milestone is, again, I think this goes back to you, Nick. I think this is just a small cleanup of docs.
Yeah. Basically, so one of the reasons I haven't got open to PR for this yet is I was evaluating if we should do performance tests for this. This is basically saying everywhere where we use an enum queue builder tag, we need to have something there saying, hey, we might add new values to this. You need to handle unknown values without crashing. I wanted to see if it would be possible to make a performance test that checks that everybody can handle unknown values without crashing. But it's surprisingly difficult because it involves forcing incorrect values into Cube past both layers of validation that we have, both OpenAPI validation and the validating webhook, which is hard. So I think I'm just going to leave this as I've got the change mostly done. I'll open a PR today. I'll leave this as just a docs stream update now to say, hey, remember that for enum values, if if there's something in there you don't you need to have a switch statement with a default case handler that says, hey, I can't do anything with this. We could. I thought about that as well, Bowie. Bowie suggested in the chat that we have like an invalid value that we allow through the things and then test for that. But like, I'm kind of like, well, then it's, if we allow it through the validations, then it's a valid value, not an invalid one, right? So, I think for now, I'd like to punt the actual figuring out how the conformance works down the road. I don't think it's a huge deal to fix this up later, as long as we've got the things in there to remind everybody, hey, effectively make sure you're handling this with a switch statement with a default. And the default is, hey, I don't know what to do, chief, basically. This is because the API conventions sort of say, hey, be careful with enums. There's a implicit there's kind of an implicit understanding that when you have an enum that it's closed over additions. And so we're just being specific that the enums that we have here are not closed for additions. We may add new stuff at any time. Removing stuff from enums is a break and change and requires an API rev, but adding stuff to enums is not. And that's what that's the point of making this clear.
Yeah. Thanks for catching this and adding it to the milestone. It'll be good. Like you're saying, those API conventions are a little tricky. And if we don't say this up front, we'll regret it later. So glad you're taking this one on.
Yeah, so this will be a pretty straightforward one, just a Go doc update.
Yeah. This next one is actually the next few are just PRs. The examples to V1 Beta 1 wanted to wait until we actually released V1 Beta 1 before we updated the examples, but it's ready to go. Thanks, Emily. The named address, we just covered that earlier. And this one also is one we covered earlier. It's fixing the issue we discussed above. So that is everything in the milestone. I feel pretty good about where we are. And again, goal is to hit RC tomorrow in the next 24 hours. And then in the next 48 hours to do a final cut of V050. Any last comments or questions on this release process before we move on? Great. Okay. Keith, I think it's up to you. Service mesh stuff.
Yeah, appreciate it. And thank you to everybody who's been involved with this process. So after conferring with the steering committee on Thursday, their guidance for kind of what we're wanting to do here is to kind of keep it within the confines of Gateway API, which we're happy to do. I guess the details of how the Gateway API maintainers and owners want to handle that and create governance structure is up to y'all. But we're just looking for to begin with a Slack channel and a meeting. And nobody I've talked to up until this point has a strong opinion on naming. So I've got two options here. One kind of cheeky and then one kind of more chill. Gateway API for Mesh Management and Administration, or GAMA, and then just Gateway API Mesh Exploration Group. Since the term working group is not has not been blessed for our usage in this use case. So purpose of this topic is just to kind of redirect some of the focus for this. It's not going to be at the Kubernetes steering committee level. Just submitting to y'all at the Gateway API level to figure out what y'all how y'all want to move forward with this.
I love Gamma. I love a bit of whimsy in naming. I love a backronym. Huge +1 from me. Plus, it's easy to say.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a fan. I like both of these names, but Gamma is certainly more fun. So yeah, I'll support that. I just want to welcome you to Gateway API community, and I know you've been contributing for a bit, but I'm excited to see where Mesh goes, and I'm excited that we have people volunteering to actually lead that effort. It's something like that I know we've been talking about or had in the back of our heads, but never had anyone to just drive it forward, and so I'm excited about that.
So I had a question. Are we thinking of starting a new set of meetings, or we can just use this set of meetings? And then in terms of Slack channel, do we need a new Slack channel, or we just reuse the existing one?
Yeah, great question. So the kind of perspective that we've had so far, and we're open to opinions and thoughts in the community, of course, but the kind of idea we've been leading with so far is that we really don't want to distract from any of the work happening kind of in the main Gateway API meeting. There are a lot of meshes, a lot of folks who are interested in wanting to be involved here, which is a good thing. But we definitely don't want to dilute the signal to noise ratio happening here for the kind of primary ingress use cases. And so we've kind of been looking for a new meeting schedule, as well as a kind of a dedicated Slack channel for communication kind of within this effort. And then any changes that we'd be proposing to API or any new resources we'd like to consider adding to the Gateway API would be submitted through Gateway enhancement proposals. And the final decision there would, of course, be up to the kind of the upstream, in this case, Gateway API group, which is this group right here.
Yeah, I just had an alternate proposal, which is you might want to just do, of course, everyone's free to kind of meet offline, but to do most of, because this group meets every week, which is a fairly high cadence. So like I can just see that it might just be okay to use this meeting, especially since most participants here are actually care about both topics.
Hi, I'd be +1 on Bowie's counter proposal. I've got too many Slack channels and meetings and stuff already.
John?
Yeah, one thing I would say is, I mean, if everyone here thinks that I think the assumption has been that the mesh folks are kind of somewhat separate from the Ingress folks. If everyone here is like, I'm just gonna have to join that meeting now as well, then I kind of agree. If not, I would say like at the very least in the first few weeks or months, like we're going to have a lot to talk about while we're kind of getting things off the ground. Certainly, even if they're not overlapping groups, I feel like in a months, maybe year time span, like it would make sense to fold it in probably. But like we're gonna have probably full agenda mesh every week for the foreseeable future if we do it here. Which if everyone wants that, it's fine with me personally. Just be warned.
Plus one to that, I'm not sure if a lot of folks have had a chance to look at our mesh exploration document, but it's pretty thick and it's just the beginning. So I agree with everything you just said, John. If that is the case, then yeah, I'm sure I'm fine with keeping it in this meeting. But there's going to be a lot.
Why don't we just have one meeting where we put all the mesh stuff we need to on the agenda and see how it goes?
So here I have a few thoughts here. I definitely think that there is a point potentially not far from now where everything belongs in the same meeting all over again. I think that is definitely where we're heading. I am open to trying anything for some period of time because you never know until you try, right? What I'll say is it's taken us a long time to get to this beta release, and we've had basically full agendas for every meeting we've had every week for a long time. And we haven't really, mesh has just kind of grazed the surface of a couple meetings, on the edge, on the periphery. I can't predict future meetings. It may be that after we hit release on this, the Ingress discussion kind of dies down, but I know we've just kind of, claimed bankruptcy on gRPC route, on route delegation of, oh, we'll get to that later. And later was supposed to be right after this release, and this release kept on, but there's things in the agenda we just haven't had time for yet. And I completely believe that this mesh topic is sufficient in scope and scale and everything to consume full hour-long meetings every week for some period of time. So I don't want to make any kind of final decision here, but my bias would be to start on a separate track until we have a bit more stability around what mesh for gateway even means, and then maybe start to merge as we see that both meetings are kind of not filling up their full time slot and could fit back together again. But this is just my perspective. I'm open to others.
Yeah, I think long term, we should probably see the two join together. Maybe this initial kickoff is probably a little bit time intensive. The only issue is I do see, for example, those two topics, gRPC route and route delegation, are actually relevant for both. So it gets awkward if it's kind of bifurcated.
It feels to me like an important part of getting this started is sort of working through the how the mechanics of what y'all are being the service mesh group. To be honest, I'll probably be involved anyway. But that want to do, is it that way? We've talked on and off a little bit about having a mesh as a root resource instead of a gateway or something like that. Talking through sort of how would that work? What do we learn from building gateway? That is a separate and involved enough discussion that it's going to take a while. It's going to be more than a couple of 1 hour slots to get to agreement on that, I think. And so I'm in favor of, some even if we call them extraordinary meetings of the broader project, that we just dedicate to that and just say, hey, let's do a few weeks of extraordinary hour or 2 hour even meetings, because I really think that some of these discussions will get in depth and an hour won't be enough time. And so a couple of those I think will set us up to then sort of be ready to write a gap that will then that will then, and then once the initial sort of gap of like, here's how we're going to deal with mesh is done, then I think that it'll be much easier to bring it back in. But I think that doing it separately until then and having it just be, hey, these are extraordinary meetings in the like literal sense of the term, in that they are, yeah, extraordinary meetings.
What is this the last item we have on our agenda for today?
Yep.
It is.
What is the biggest single thing that we need to talk about with mesh first? Like, what would be the next biggest thing we would actually bring to the agenda? I'm just curious.
So it would probably be, John, keep me honest on this, linking the doc for folks to, I put it here in the chat for folks to peruse. Based on the discussion we've been having so far, it would probably be picking a set of semantics for what it means to attach routes to things. What is the mesh in the gateway API? What are the attachment resources, or what are the attachment targets rather for the XRoute resources? Upgrades, not upgrades, but just mesh domain object ideas, and figuring out what the best path forward for that. That's the immediate goal of conversation, and we've really only scratched the surface towards that, as you might be able to tell in this doc.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's very big. It feels very big and nebulous in my head. Yeah, it certainly is something I could see. I can kind of see it both ways. Like, part of me wants to just like add mesh stuff to the agenda, and just if we start to feel overloaded, then deal with that. Make a breakout session. But the other part of me is like, I wouldn't mind. Like, I have both ingress and mesh in my purview. I'm going to be a part of the mesh stuff that we do. I can agree with the notion that we may not want to have a bunch of extra meetings, but I see a lot of weight to this, and I could say, why don't we just either start adding something to the meeting we have, or make one meeting and see if we, where that goes. I don't know. I'm kind of in the middle on it. I would almost be happy to spend a good chunk of the rest of this meeting talking about that topic in particular, and then going from there.
To clarify, you mean the topic of what to do with the meetings, or the topic of mesh attachment?
Mesh attachment. I mean, just dive right into it if there's nothing else on the agenda. I personally,
I think we should decide how we're going to handle this going forward before we start doing that. I think, as somebody else said, there's going to be a lot of us that have interest in both aspects of this. Maybe that the company we represent may have one person in each camp, or maybe the same person in both camps. But I think I echo somewhat what Rob was saying about that we've got some big lifting still to do on the ingress piece of this, with route delegation and gRPC and other issues. And I think it would really slow us down on progressing that stuff if we try to handle the mesh use case issues within these meetings. As Rob was mentioning, we've pretty much always filled virtually every weekly meeting with a full slate, and oftentimes run out of time. So
I get that. I'm seeing a different perspective too. Like I said, I'm kind of on the fence, but I'm seeing a different perspective too, where we just spent a lot of time in this meeting and recently with like a post and trying to get a work group started. We spent a lot of time trying to do the organizational part that people are saying need to come first. And that has lost a lot of time too. So it might be good to just start diving in. I don't know. It's a suggestion. I don't feel super strongly about it, but personally, I'm interested in just starting to actually talk about the issue instead of talking about how we're going to talk about the issue.
No argument from me there. I'm ready to get to work as well. And like I said, it's whatever is going to be most beneficial for the community. I absolutely hear the intersecting use cases, and maybe the answer to that is that we're just, if we do split it off, we're careful about what we bring to the Gateway API meetings. Maybe we bring a subset of conversation topics from mesh meetings to the greater Gateway API meeting, maybe to clarify the usage of a certain resource or to propose something there. But like I said, no super strong opinions either way. Whatever the community is going to make the community most effective is what I'm for.
So
What I would suggest, sorry, real quick, I'd suggest that the mesh, those interested in the mesh use case, initiate some independent meetings to start putting things together and reviewing proposals. I think things like this Gateway API mesh proposal that Keith, you just linked in the chat. I think that stuff should be shared on the Slack channel for Gateway API, so those who are interested are aware of it. And then either like every other week or maybe once a month, to allocate at least a chunk of the Gateway Monday meeting, this meeting, to getting an update from the folks that are working on the mesh use case and where things are at. And we just know that we're going to allocate, whether it's a full meeting or half a meeting or something, so that there's at least that touch point on a regular basis to keep people informed and such.
yeah, and I'd echo that as my preferred starting point. I like that idea a lot. I think one thing to keep in mind with what has been proposed, even if it is a separate meeting that we start with, is that we're still talking about gaps. We're still talking about things that would come back here and be proposed and discussed and approved. But mesh is, from my perspective, much less well-defined than, say, ingress, right? In terms of scope and in terms of what is ingress routing versus what is mesh routing. There's, that it's a little bit broader or whatever. So I think there's a lot of value in going back to something we had way back in the day in this project, which was, we had an office hours meeting. There was a period where we had 2 meetings a week. And one of those meetings was intended to be very, unstructured and just, this is a working meeting where we're just running through proposals, whatever, very, very loosely, and actually working through, like making edits as we go kind of thing. And I'm not trying to suggest how anyone would do a service mesh focused meeting, but that's what it feels like. Like there's so much to do just to form a sensible proposal to then discuss at something like this. That's my working theory, at least as a starting point. I echo what Shane said in that and Keith and everyone, that we would just like to get started and move. But my personal preference is just to make sure that we don't disrupt this project too much and our progress towards GA and everything else. I would personally prefer starting something separate and then working towards merging those as things stabilize and become a little bit more clear.
Okay.
Yeah, I am +1 on something like that. Just like I said, extraordinary meetings, working meetings for now, and then figure it out as we go.
I'm gonna give it a +1, just because I was on the fence anyway, just to kind of stop having a flat hand on this.
Awesome. Go ahead, Toby.
I think I was -1, but I yield to consensus. So go ahead.
Make the meeting.
Yep, made the meeting. I think if it works out, if we can make a case for another Slack channel, that makes sense to me too. And again, the idea there being that is for the nitty-gritty discussion rather than and then bringing gaps back rather than lots of stuff. It's just to keep the signal to noise in the main channel a bit higher. Yeah, it's probably going to need to be called like something.
I'm like a little bit on the fence about that, just because that one is harder to merge back together later.
Yeah, true.
But we can talk about that more.
I mean, you could also just use the SIG network API channel and just thread, just use long threads instead.
Yeah, like that's, I think like the meetings we can definitely just, they can merge at some point. I think the Slack channel, you'd end up with like 2 sets of users and it might get a little confusing if you have to check both of them.
Just try to mega thread.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm in. I'm
Thread
in
that people
favor of
have to
starting that.
follow.
Yep. We can push the limits on Slack even more than we already are.
I might have an unusual viewpoint here, but I don't
You're
know-
really quiet, Candace.
Oh, sorry. It's Zoom. Is it better
That's a
now?
bit better, yeah.
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
I might have an unusual viewpoint on this, but I don't know. I don't see the case where these two things are coming together in the future. Only because we just had this similar discussion at work today. We're trying to keep these two things separate. So can you just give me and anyone else who's interested, we might be the, you know, fewer of us here, the reasoning behind why service mesh and gateway API are like bread and butter?
Yeah, I can take that. So a lot of what spurred this conversation, this effort, was the fact that service mesh facing APIs like SMI, service mesh interface, have a very similar API surface to gateway API. Same kind of route resources. You know, a network is a network is a network. TCP is TCP is TCP. And the idea behind this is, you know, Gateway API has done a really great job at describing the way that network flows within the Kubernetes context. And the resources there are similar enough between like both sets of SMI interfaces and Gateway API interfaces are similar enough that why not just have one? And that's kind of what we're pursuing. Yeah, that might lead to some changes, and that's what we want to explore and maybe submit those in the form of GEPs. But at the end of the day, we love for Kubernetes users to be able to configure their mesh and their ingress using the exact same resources, and kind of just collapse the community a bit. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but unless you're coming from the standpoint of someone who's working with ingress controllers and has never worked with service mesh. So it does, I mean, a network is a network until you get down to, you know, what are the messages that are passing back and forth? Are you routing connections? Are you routing, you know, smaller messages back and forth between pods, containers, other items? So I think a network is a network until you get down to defining what kind of traffic you're passing and what kind of scale you're working at.
I think I understand what you're saying, but I think there's a couple of things. One is that a service mesh you have to have a way to get this traffic in and out of a service mesh. It's not just like in another extension of the IP network where you can just, you know, directly communicate to things on the service mesh without some function providing in that ingress point. The other thing is that a lot of the folks that are companies, which should say, that are involved in the Gateway API are also companies providing service mesh solutions. So we, you know, for those of us that are in that position, there's some good, there's some strong arguments to be said that to use the same overall API to handle both the east to west and the north to south traffic configuration. So I think there's pretty good arguments for why to do that.
I feel like at the largest level, the big advantage of having the Gateway API describe both the ingress case and the mesh case is that it lets you slide from the, you know, this gateway handles the just the ingress case and sort of the I use very loosely simple use case, and then it lets you sort of theoretically add on bits as you need to go, provided your implementation can handle it. Like having the same description language like means that for the same sort of set of broad problems, really it speaks to me that it would mean that in the magical world we had where all of this was fully implemented, then theoretically you could install an implementation that does both, start with just using the ingress stuff, and then end up with the full service mesh bits. Right? And that, I think, is the sort of the end game that we should all hope to end up with personally. Sorry, John.
Yeah, I was just going to expand a bit. Like one concrete example is like if I'm something like Flagger or Argo CD or whatever, and I want to implement progressive rollouts, I can do that in Gateway API, but then mesh users won't be able to use it. And I could go do it in SMI, but then people that don't use SMI do it, or I could do Istio, right? It does kind of the same thing that Gateway API did for Ingress, but at a wider scale. So all these custom integrations can just create a route. And if that's handled by mesh, that's great. If that's handled by Ingress, that's cool as well. Like Istio, for example, that's where my background is. We've used the same APIs, almost complete overlap between the two. And I think there are obviously differences between them, but the vast majority of stuff we want to do is the same. Like we want to be able to route, match, and filter, and all do these things to HTTP traffic. We want to add, this is not part of the spec now, but authorization policies, for example, could be something we explore in the future. All those things are common, regardless of where we're trying to run them. So we've had a lot of success using the same APIs for both cases.
Yeah, I just echo that, one of the things that I think is powerful about Gateway API is that we've kind of made it modular by design, right? And so routes hold the vast majority of logic, right? And they can be attached to anything. And so far we focused on gateway, right? Like a route is attached to a gateway and that represents an entry point into your network, for example. Or it could represent many things. I know, but a gateway can represent many things. With that said, there's been some interesting discussion about egress, right? Like what if you use routes to represent the way out of your cluster or your network, and similar for mesh. And I think our routes are really the core of this API, despite the gateway API name. But I think there's some really cool promise, an interesting promise for mesh, and I'm just excited to see what it looks like. I don't know, I don't have the full vision yet, but I'm excited to see what they come up with. And yes, I agree with that, Bowie. Yes, we should have called this the routing API, route API, something, but I can't rename it again. One rename and you're done.
Yeah, no more renaming. Too bad.
We should rename it to Service APIs.
Oh man.
The original, right?
But yes.
Yeah, that was that was the original.
I finally, just 2 or 3 days ago, I finally removed what I think is the last reference to service APIs from our code. So I think it's finally gone, maybe, but we'll probably still find something somewhere down the road. But with that said, I want to bring this back. I think we have clear next steps. Maybe Keith, John, Mike, if you want to come up with some suggested times for an initial meeting. I don't think this meeting needs to run indefinitely. I think the goal is to merge these back together, but just to start, if you want to suggest some times and we can get started with separate meetings. I will probably be one of many that attends both, but and no need. Don't feel like you need to attend both. But if you're interested in both mesh and the main gateway API, I think we'll probably start with 2 meetings. And then I think we agreed to start in the same Slack channel and use threads a lot. And if that becomes overwhelming, split out. Does that line up with what everyone's thinking here?
Yep.
Cool. I'll make my one plea to say that if you have something that needs a discussion longer than fits in like 30 minutes, please put it in like a GitHub issue, at least eventually. I don't know, the Slack thread UX is just painful for me. Like basically, it's everything that I care about gets lost when it gets pushed over random new threads that have just been updated more recently.
Yeah. I feel that pain.
Maybe this is a reason to push us to use GitHub discussions or whatever the whatever that product is.
Well, yeah, that's basically what is already in use for most of the Gateway API stuff. So actually, yes, good job on that. That has made like the longer, more complex discussions like much easier to parse through than some other like communities that I'm in. So yeah, please do use GitHub discussions for complex things.
Awesome.
And are we going with Gamma? Please tell me we're going with Gamma. It's such a great name.
We have to find things for alpha and beta first, and then we're clear.
Well, Gateway API is moving to beta this week, so Gamma is just like right there.
Yep, very nice.
So yeah, next steps sound good to me. Just calling out something John asked in the chat. Can we get a label or something for mesh on GitHub? I +1 that. I think that would be very useful for both parties here. And then second on my list is once we get those times, do you want us to just ping the Slack channel, ping y'all directly? Okay, I see nods for ping Slack channel, and y'all get that.
Just make sure you advertise it and also email the SIG network mailing list. So just make sure it's advertised everywhere.
Okay, yeah, good call out. I'll take that as an action item for my stuff because I've been doing the whole working group thing beforehand. I'll get that brought. I'll get the decisions for this meeting kind of typed up in a draft, and then once we get the times hammered out, hopefully that announcement will have a first meeting time and day here. If you're interested, please show up. And we'll try to do our best.
And one additional thing, put the meeting info on our community contrib page on the main doc site.
Yeah, we could. So let me, don't have a great link for it, but we have a community page on Gateway API website. It also includes an embedded Google Calendar of all SIG network meetings. So that means we should add this to the SIG network meeting calendar. So anyone who's in SIG network gets an invite. Just ask around on Slack. I'm happy to help. I know any other maintainer is too, but we'll make sure everything gets set up for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we want this to be broadcast as far as possible, and I'll be leading on the folks with the keys to get all this broadcast to everyone.
Also, I think I'm the only one, but it would be really nice if the meeting could be around about this time. Then I can actually come if it's early in the morning Pacific time. I really like y'all, but I ain't working at 2 a.m. for y'all. So yeah, if you could do it about this time, I would very much appreciate it.
All right, we'll do our best.
Cool. I think that's it for today's meeting. Any last comments or 10 minutes back? Cool. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. We'll see you on the other side. We should have a release out, and we should have a new meeting schedule, a new Gamma group. Very excited. Thanks, everyone, for a great discussion, and we'll see you next week.
See ya.